stream of consciousness.
Wildlife is very real. I wonder if a long time ago, when humans didn't live in cities or have farms or any form of agriculture, or, just those tens of thousands of years when we kind of just made incredible cave paintings and then did other things we're not 100% sure. Did we think of it as wildlife? It must have been. There were no domestic animals to compare it to. So all animals were wildlife, and then they must have just been animals. Did they have a spirit? When I see the raccoons on my deck, they absolutely have personalities and intention, and their intention is to fuck with me. Even the babies, it's not so much, the babies aren't there so much to fuck with me. They want to play. They're learning to play because the raccoons on my deck are urban raccoons, and they have access to an incredible buffet. My house backs onto an alleyway in Chinatown, and the dumpster situation is it's lit. The dumpster situation is lit. You can't use cayenne pepper to keep raccoons away on my deck because they're used to delicious spicy food. So for them, it's just a little taste. They're like, oh, I'm familiar with this. I really hate them. They destroy my anti-gravity chairs. They like to just get into the lacing and chew on it. They break my potted plants. So I have no plants on my deck, and people come over. My deck is very large, and they go, wow, what a great deck. You should grow vegetables and flowers out here. And I'm like, no, the raccoons will get them. And then people continue to tell me about all the things I can grow on my deck. And I listen, I half listen. I'm not listening. I'm waiting for them to shut up. And I explain to them again, no. The raccoons will destroy them for fun. Even if they don't want to eat it, they will destroy it for fun. And that's just how they are. When I first moved in, the raccoons there's raccoons all over the place, but there was also raccoons just living under the deck because my genius landlord never sealed it up and said that there was no point in sealing it up because they live in the tree, which is not true. They were living under the deck, a whole family of them. So the raccoons were unfucking believable. I remember one day I'm just lying down in my anti-gravity chair, and there's just across, there's like a little laneway between my house and the next house, and there's like this tiny balcony that an air conditioner is sitting on the top floor of the building next door, the third floor, and I see this raccoon lolling about in the sun, which is not normal. Raccoons do not loll about in the sun. They do not like the sun. They are nocturnal animals. And the raccoon is on his back, and it kind of leans. It does this like arch in its back, and it's got its head upside down, and it looks at me, and it waves its little hand. Hello! And that was the moment I knew that the raccoon situation was not going to be normal, and had probably never been normal here. There was the family that lived on the deck. You know, the babies are adorable. They give each other mouth kisses, and they play and they do cute things and they destroy everything. They also, I'd be in bed. The door to my deck is in my bedroom. I'd be in my bed reading a book, and I hear like a little like scratch, and I look up. And there's maybe an adolescent raccoon or, preteen raccoon, not quite a baby, standing on its hind legs, looking into my bedroom, and it waves at me. I'm not even kidding. It's a little messed up. I've adopted this wave. I do it. It's kind of like a modified version of the wave you give babies, where instead of like you rotate at the wrist, your wrist stays still. And with a baby, you kind of like open and close your hand. But with the raccoons, you kind of wave your fingers. So instead of having the whole hand closed, It's like a wave of your fingers, but not of the whole hand. So it was doing that at me, and I shuddered. Just, oh, they want to be friends. They truly did want to be friends, but in this disgusting way, just disgusting neighbors, truly, and not the kind that you can kind of like learn to love either. Because I tried, but these raccoons were really just they're so gross, and they're fat and fluffy. We evicted the raccoons eventually. The babies were sealed in, and I had to call the maintenance guy to come back and unseal the babies, which he did. And they don't live underneath anymore. But the neighborhood raccoons, they still come every now and then to my deck as sort of like a really great training ground, playground area where the babies can kind of like have fun and climb on things and learn to chew and destroy without danger of being run over by cars. And so when they disappeared, and this new raccoon, after the one we evicted them, I mean, there's a new round of babies now, and they're just around. But in addition to that, there's this raccoon that's been around since we evicted the family under the deck. And it's on top of the deck, but it hides in the corner. It's mangy. It started vomiting on the deck recently, like disgusting. It looks like that, you know, that foam you get in a can to kind of like seal up gaps around windows or in a wall, things like that. It's the vomit looks like that, and it's a mangy raccoon. It's disgusting. There's COVID now, and animal control really just does not want to come and get this thing. But I threw some water at it. That actually seems to work. However, the cute fluffy babies are still around. I try to scare them. I make scary noises, and sometimes they actually come closer to me when I make my scary noises. They think it's funny and cute, but it's not funny and cute. It's me trying to scare them. And the neighbors who have like a rear window type situation onto my deck, it's just like a whole wall of, I think, 3 or 4 different apartments that just can like watch me do what I do. They've had many performances of this, and it hasn't really scared them away. Animal control told me to just take a broom and poke the mangy raccoon until it goes away. And I did that, and it actually did work. It hasn't been back yet. And they said to just do it again if it comes back, which I might. But these raccoons, I don't think they could really be called wildlife. I mean, do you call rats wildlife? Because if you're going to call rats wildlife, then yes, these raccoons are also wildlife. But I think it's debatable, you know, or there's, in my mother's backyard, she feeds birds, and she has incredible birds in her backyard. Are they wildlife? They kind of are, but they're only there because they're getting fed, so maybe they're semi-domesticated. It's hard to know. There's amazing video footage you can see of in Vancouver, which is very far away in a totally different kind of place. But they're on the Pacific coast, and they have bald eagles, and hundreds of bald eagles, and they all eat garbage. They live at the garbage dump like seagulls. Are seagulls wildlife? Because they're animals, but they live off of garbage. They're basically pigeons, and pigeons are basically rats. These things are all basically just rats. I'm sure they all carry diseases. I don't know about the bald eagle, but what a majestic sight to see these things just living off of our trash. Because not too long ago, we thought they'd all go extinct because of our poison. But now, they're just all going to get diabetes because of our trash. But they live, and they exist. There's many of them, and there will only be more. And I think that's cool. That's really cool. I wonder what will happen to them if we all die, or most of us die, and the rest of us are left kind of in this like semi-savage state where even though we know things because we used to have the internet, we're completely incapable of executing them because we don't actually have any skills. Our systems are so complex, and it's not possible to, just keep the internet running when, only 1 out of every 100 people has survived. I mean, what if all the people who knew how to run the internet are dead? The same with things like growing food. That's for sure not going to happen if 1 out of every 100 of us dies. If only 1 out of every 100 of us survives. Do you know that decimated means to lose 1 in 10? So when more than 1 in 10 people die, that group of people wasn't decimated. That group of people was annihilated. Maybe it's not. Yeah, you can have total annihilation and you can have annihilation. And I guess if 10 out of 10 die, that's total annihilation. But if 9 out of 10 die, that's annihilation. Or let's say that 9 out of 10 die. There's only 1 person. That 1 person can't reproduce. Therefore, that group has been totally annihilated. Now, let's say that 4 out of 10 die, but the 4 who died were all the males. That group has also been totally annihilated. And the same with the reverse. If all the females die, that group has been totally annihilated. Even though that small group of people still exists. I guess the difference would be if you could somehow convince the people who had annihilated you, if you were to have children with them, if you were able to convince them to instead maintain whatever it was about your group that made your group unique and to keep the group's name going. And then over time, essentially the group would just still be the same group, even though it was different genetically, but it wouldn't even be that different genetically because it's people. It'd just be like a little different, but it would still fundamentally still be that group. So they've no longer been totally annihilated. They've actually just been, I don't know. I guess if it falls under the category of genocide, it would be a genocide. Has there ever been like a successful genocide? I hope not. Because there's been many genocides, but a successful genocide would really be, that would really be something. I don't know how you would accomplish that. I mean, I don't want to think too much about how you could accomplish that. And maybe if there was a way to do that, you would want to keep that knowledge hidden forever and just say it doesn't even exist. Now, I don't know. Extinction of animals is totally different because they're not people. It's sad. It makes me really sad to think about animals going extinct exclusively because of our need for space. But it happens. But they're not people. People need space. Who am I to tell some people that they can't, start living inside the jungle because they need the space? I'm not the one who needs that space. I'm probably the one who's got the, rare earth metals in my cell phone that the people moving into the jungle are harvesting so that they can make $1 a day or whatever is going on. Maybe more than $1 a day. I can't judge that. People want their own phone. Phones are pretty handy. They're entertaining. You can do a lot with a phone. In the past we didn't have phones, and now we do. And if you don't have a phone at all, you literally cannot get into people's apartments. Their doorbells don't exist anymore. Which you've probably noticed this. Doorbells don't exist, and the ones that exist are actually, I'm so angry. You ring the doorbell, but what it does is there's a camera in it, and it rings the person's phone inside. So you need the phone. You still need the phone. My mom got a security system, and you needed to like disarm it using your phone. And we decided to just not turn the security system on, because in order to disarm it using my phone, I have to have my phone on me. And if my phone is on me, it needs to be fully charged. And those are two scenarios that aren't always happening for me. They're not in the truth position. They're in the false position. It's nice if you don't need your phone to walk about through the world without it. And sometimes you're walking about the world with your phone and the battery dies, and you just have to live with that. Hopefully you're not the kind of person who has panic attacks when the battery in your phone dies. I, again, won't judge you. I once lost my phone in Los Angeles, where I do not live. And I was also drunk. And I was staying with my grandmother. And my uncle lives there also. And so does my cousin. And in the morning, I was just bereft. So it wasn't just a hangover. It was a hangover plus this thing of like, and now my phone is gone. And I don't always need my phone on me, but to have the phone actually gone, it's like, maybe it's like when you've taken someone for granted and then they die and you're like, I took that person for granted and now they're gone forever. And I'll never be able to use them to look up my contact list to figure out how to get in touch with my other friends. And I'll never be able to ask them things like how long to cook an egg, or what does it mean when you have white lumps on your eyelid. I'll never be able to use them to play a game or to solve disputes by looking them up on Wikipedia. All of those things gone too soon. And yes, I did just compare a phone to a human, the loss of a phone to the loss of a human being, which I said was offensive to do with animals. The phone is not even like life. It's not like BIOS. But does it have a spirit? Do our phones have a life force inside them? I reject that wholeheartedly, but we'll see how I feel if I lose my phone again. I feel like it's more like a conduit. It's a conduit that I can use to access people and information and entertainment. And it's almost like a window. It's got glass. You can't really see through it though. Like the image, our brains know that the image is 2D. They just know. Our brains and our eyes especially know that we're not looking through something. We're looking at a surface. That's fine, I guess. I mean, that's okay. I have family, including some very young nieces who live very, very, very far away. And it's interesting talking to them on a phone because I think it's the same with friends too. Well, with friends, adults, like my brother also, to have a relationship through the screen, it's facilitated by the fact that we actually know each other, and have like the longer a history you have with a friend or a family member, I think the easier it is to kind of like make that connection through the screen, unless they're the kind of like cold, reserved, emotionless person who would be difficult to connect with even in person. But if they're not like that, it's not so difficult to kind of like connect with them over this video phone. But with small children who barely know you, it's like this other thing. It takes a long time for them to kind of recognize you. You have to work on it. And I know it's always like that with small children. Like we all have that memory of being small and some ancient, disgusting stranger comes over and says your name. Like, oh, Zizi, do you remember me? I'm blah, blah, blah. And then they go to kiss you and you're afraid. And it's with the video phone, it's sort of like that, except you can't reach out and grab them. So it's less terrifying. The children have more power in this situation. It's also, it's not like a hologram where you have a 360-degree view of what's going on. It's just this screen, this tiny window through which you can interact. So if the child doesn't want to interact, they'll just like move out of the line of vision and go, which is what happens in real life too. But in real life, you have that real life thing of being in space, which is different. So there needs to be enough space to truly go away. And that's a thing. But one thing that's really exciting and interesting about holograms is that holograms are, there's a specific term for this, but like if you have a photograph and you cut it up into pieces, what you've got is tiny segments of an image, cropped portions of an image that don't really, they give you the only information is the information from what you can see from that square, and it won't tell you what the whole picture is. Whereas with a hologram, and I'm not talking about the kind of like, oh, it's like a rainbow color thing. I'm talking about like an actual hologram made on this like weird special hologram film, and they're usually just red or green. It's really hard to make full color holograms. If you take a hologram, and you usually have to mount them on glass also because it's like a film. If you take a jelly-like film, if you take a hologram and you smash it into pieces, each piece contains all the information that you need to reconstruct the entire hologram. So whereas with a photograph, like if you cut up a photo negative and you bring it into the dark room and you create a new photograph with it, it's just the tiny piece of the photograph. It's nothing. You don't know what you're looking at. But you take a piece of the hologram, and if you set it up right with your laser in the correct position, then you can recreate the whole hologram. And that's because the hologram really is like looking through a window. So whereas with a photograph, if you change the angle that you look at the photograph from, that photograph is never going to really be different. It's just always the same. It just might have some kind of those effects where, like, if you really think about it, it's like, I forget the term for it, but it's like what an anamorphic effect would be. But that's not the exact term because it's a little different. But with a hologram, if you take that tiny piece of the hologram and you look through it and alter your angle, it's like a peephole into another dimension. And that's why holograms are really cool. I used to make holograms, and I never made an interesting looking hologram ever, because I was never really able to think of kind of like what the right subject would be for the medium. It was cool to play around with it and to kind of be like, whoa, science. But man, coming up with like a cool hologram thing, and I don't mean like a skull or like I don't know, like a scary zombie doctor. Like it is cool, but something else. I never found the thing that like really turned me on to make an image of with holograms. I was just being dumb. But I mean, holograms are kind of dumb too. They're dumb until somebody figures out something smart to do with them. And right now, like conceptually, by right now, I mean 60 years later, they're just conceptually interesting. People do great hologram stuff. What am I talking about? It's just me. It's just me. I can't tell you any great hologram artists. Like I know that there's like there's like blue chip artists who have done hologram stuff. I think Bruce Nauman did, but like honestly, if you take a couple steps back, it's fine. But the only thing that I guess makes it interesting, scare quotes, is the fact that like a famous guy did it, not what the famous guy actually did with it. And that's okay. I went to this art island in Japan once, and there's they've got different art things. They've got an incredible museum, one incredible museum, and then there's like not far away there's like a hotel where they have an art collection, and they had all this art by this guy I'd never heard of, and it wasn't bad. It was like cool, like yeah, it's not bad, but it was super interesting. He's like an American guy. To see, like, there was also some like super famous canon people in there, but not like Picasso or anything. Like it's all more contemporary sort of stuff. But then this guy I'd never heard of in my life, and he was so well represented in there. And I mean, obviously, I guess like the guy whose collection it was really likes his work. But that was also funny to me. I once kind of recently, I was recently in Japan making a movie, and a friend, I sent a picture of me and like some of our friends to some friends I had lived with in Japan, and one of my friends go, "Oh, is EC big in Japan?" And I don't think she meant it as a diss, but that's actually a diss. That's what big in Japan is. It's a diss, and I guess I don't know. Trying to unpack that. What does that mean? Japan is not North America. It's not Europe. In Japan, non-Japanese art is out of context. And maybe when people use the term big in Japan as a diss, which is not what my friend meant at all. She's ESL, but I mean that's what it is in a North American context. I think what they're saying is that it can't be good because the people who appreciate it the most aren't appreciating it in its context. But I mean, that's also kind of cool. Like, if you can make something that touches people who don't really know where you're coming from, but still get a strong feeling for it, that's really special. I think that's a really special gift that you give your audience, but also that your audience gives you. And yeah, that's, I guess, an interesting thing about like context and how it works with art, including music and theater, which we can expand to cinema also, and dance and all these other things. The context is yeah, it can change. And I mean, it can be pretty controversial when people find something humorous outside of its context. And often some education is required around that. But there's still so much that's special about being able to make people feel something, without intending to make it for them, or without their knowing the circumstances under which you made it. And that's cool. That's a goal. That's a life goal. I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe that's the thing. Maybe that's what every artist achieves when their work speaks to somebody. Because we never, unless you have that privilege of like being with the artist through their process, or really knowing them over long periods of time, or having them really sit down and explain to you where they're coming from on just like a personal level, um, we never we never really understand. That's also not to say that there isn't a lot to be gained for having distance, right? Like, it's having somebody who's interested in an artwork or an artist, and then taking the time to look into the artist's context without without being beholden to the artist's viewpoint as the sum total of the context. I mean that's the work of an art historian, and a great art historian is able to do that, to kind of understand where the artist was coming from, but also to understand what the artist wasn't seeing in where they were coming from, because we're so often influenced in ways that we don't even recognize. It's kind of embarrassing sometimes, actually, to like kind of like you put something down and you go away and you look at it again and you're like, oh my God, that's what that was. That's what that was. And maybe that's kind of the like an attribute of really thoughtful work, is to not let it out in the world. If when that's where it's at, you probably want to know where your head was at, or where it was coming from. But that's a life work. That's what therapy is for. That's what self-reflection is for. That's what meditation in whatever form it takes for you. That's what that's for, to kind of get to the place where you can have some self-awareness. You could go the other direction entirely and be so completely unself-aware that everything is just this stream of consciousness, just like laying it out there completely, not even shameless, just like an unawareness that you should even have shame in the first place. Completely childlike, entering the realm of childish. If you're lucky, you make things that speak to people then too. If you want to be making art, if this is just like what you do in the day-to-day with your life, and it's not really leading to anything that's helpful for anyone, then that's definitely some kind of like neurological condition. I think that goes beyond the psychiatric into the realm of the neurological, which is that just a way of being like less stigmatizing or more? I don't know. What is worse? I think to actually live with a serious neurological condition is probably really hard. Just an extremely difficult situation, particularly because I'm sure that everyone on the planet is not considerate or thoughtful or kind in how they treat people with serious neurological conditions. That's intense. I once was at a dinner party, and it was a dinner party. I was the youngest person there by a good 20 years. And there was a woman there, and she was kind of cool. No. At first, she just seemed kind of like abrupt and stuff, but there was something a little cool about her. And then I sort of noticed, no, I don't think I noticed anything. I didn't notice anything. And something came up, and she was explaining that she has Parkinson's disease. And it was something that had come on very quickly. And now her entire life had stopped. And her life was all about dealing with this Parkinson's disease. Because she was older, but she wasn't like a senior, maybe in her 50s, late 50s. And she was explaining how it all worked. Like, she has this tremor when she's still, but moving, the tremor disappears. She just drinks coffee and cigarettes all the time because that actually is good for her. It calms the tremors. And she was, yeah, she was so interesting about it. She was an artist, and she had like a really great kind of like perspective on what was happening to her. And by perspective, I mean she had compartmentalized it. She was definitely able to kind of like look at it as like an interesting thing as that was happening, as opposed to a thing that was happening to her. And I'm sure it was extremely difficult as well, but it was cool talking to her, and learning about all of these things that happen to her with Parkinson's. And it's kind of, I don't know, like those are the things that like you think to yourself, like, well, you know, like I'll never get Parkinson's, and then one day it happens. We all have to die eventually. And you know, an interesting quote I once heard from a doctor is that everyone with mental illness dies of a physical cause. And even without mental illness, the way we present ourselves can have such an effect on how we're treated by the medical system. You have to know how to advocate for yourself, but you also have to look like somebody deserving of treatment, regardless of what you're going in for. So this is why the ideal is to stay super healthy and never end up in the hospital. And that will not be achieved through any sort of obsessive behaviors at all. Really don't know. Really don't know how to live forever. I don't know if I even want to. But I would absolutely love to live to 120 with the mental faculties I currently have and the body I currently have. I would love that. I must be unique in this opinion. Probably the only person in the world who's ever thought of this. But of course, there would be no need for new people if I got my wish there. Yeah, anyhow, the wildlife out there, which is not quite so wild, if we all lived perfectly healthy to 120, they'd probably have a pretty hard time with that too, unless we somehow figured to radically alter our society to not be so full of shit and selfish. But that's okay, because I love you all. I love my friends. I love my family. I love my neighbors. I try to love everybody on the street, and sometimes I do things that are like a little aggressive on my bike. Sometimes I'm walking down the street and it's crowded, and I'm like, motherfuckers, who the fuck are these people? Fuck them. But, you know, I try in general to remember that everybody's great. Pretty much everybody is great. And we should all just love each other. To avoid things like genocides. It's important. One love.